Welcome to Dr. Creepin's dungeon. Caves, yes, they captivate our imagination with their mystery, natural beauty and scientific significance, and their historical connections. They offer a unique environment that sparks curiosity, provides an opportunity for exploration and discovery, as we shall see in tonight's collection of stories. Now, as ever before we begin, a word of caution. Tonight's stories may contain strong language, as well as descriptions of violence and horrific imagery. That sounds like your kind of thing. Then let's begin. The girl in the cave. I'm sending this to you, dear Lucas, before it's too late. You knew what this holiday was supposed to be. A crossroads where I could truly embrace adulthood. I told you I was going to propose to Lara. As you know, we travelled to Greece with Lara's college roommate Tina and her boyfriend Costas. Tina's family owns a house in the mountains. She invited us to stay there for 2 weeks. I'd told Tina and Costas about my plans as well. We were going to wait and surprise Lara. But now, it's too late. These past days have proven to be seminal, but not in the way I anticipated. I fear we walked into a nightmare. Deep below us, a nameless blasphemy has awoken. It's still outside, calling for me, and I know now I cannot escape. What follows is my account of our stay in this godforsaken place. I'm going to tell you what I saw as I saw it. All of it is true. I stared out of the car window, my eyes bright with awe. The Pindus Mountains stretched out before me. Its peaks rose in the distance, like they'd been kneaded together by a titan of old. Tina turned around in the passenger seat and sniggered as she saw my expression. Well, they call these mountains the spine of Greece for a reason, she said. I bet they do, I answered absent-mindedly. Lara grabbed my hand and squeezed it gently. I'm happy we finally get to do this, she said. I turned towards her and smiled. Lara's golden locks swayed around like molten gold. I leant forward and kissed her. Me too. Tina beamed at us. Oh, you'll deserve a break after finishing med school. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Costas glance at me through the rearview mirror. He sighed. Yes, everyone is happy. Tina slapped him on the shoulder. It's too early for you to sulk already. Costas sighed again. Easy for you to say. You haven't been driving for hours. I told you the house was in a remote area, Tina snapped. I didn't think you meant this remote, Costas replied exasperatedly. Well, I offered to drive, I interjected. Costas grinned. No offense, Adam, but I'd rather walk up these mountains than have you drive me. Tina and Lara nodded their heads in agreement. Fine, I said. Whatever. How much longer, Tina? Lara asked. About 2 hours. Costas groaned. Don't be so grumpy, Tina said playfully. Besides, I'm sure this region has enough creepy crawlers to keep a brave entomologist like you interested. Costas smirked. The house belonged to your grandparents, right? Lara continued. Tina nodded her head. Well, actually, it's been in my family for generations. I used to spend my summers there as a child, but since my parents left Greece, it's fallen into disuse. My mum only decided to renovate it a couple of years ago, and since then we've rented it out to tourists. Well, admittedly, it's a little inaccessible. Only one way in and one way out, but the nature's sublime. Anyways, my mum made sure the house is stocked up on enough food and drink. Perfect, Lara said, and beamed at me. I returned a smile. After almost 2 hours of climbing up mountains, we reached a narrow bridge extending over a deep ravine. Costa stared at the old bridge. Charming, he muttered. Tina shot him a dirty look. Costas carefully maneuvered the car over the bridge. I looked out of the window only to see the steep drop of the ravine. It sent a shiver down my back. A little inaccessible had been mildly put. 15 more minutes, Tina exclaimed excitedly. We drove up the last section of the mountain through a dense forest. Dark clouds loomed in the distance. I think there's a storm coming, I said. Tina shrugged. No, we'll be fine. That night a fierce storm did sweep over us. The wind howled as the rain crashed against the house. It made me restless. I was falling in and out of sleep. Then, around 5 a.m., the ground began to shake. An earthquake. It wasn't violent, but enough to stir me awake. I looked at Lara lying next to me in a deep sleep, undisturbed by the noise outside. I stayed in bed for a couple more hours, but sleep eluded me. Around 8 a.m., I got up and walked downstairs. In the living room, I hovered around a shotgun, which was mounted against the wall. I knew this was meant to hunt waterfowl. As a child, my granddad had often taken me duck hunting and taught me how to use guns like the one before me. Tina and Costas walked through the front door. Costas's face looked gloomy. The bridge collapsed, he said when he saw me. What? We couldn't sleep, so we went for a walk, Tina said. Did you feel the earthquake? I nodded. We went to check out if there was any damage, Tina continued. The earthquake must have knocked loose some boulders which fell on the bridge and destroyed it. And, to make matters worse, Costas interrupted and held up his phone. The storm seems to have knocked out the telephone lines. I don't have a network anymore. I fished my phone out of my pocket and saw I had no connection either. So, we're stuck here. A knot formed in my stomach. Tina nodded. Well, for now we are, but don't worry, the phone networks regularly fail out here. It'll take a few days to repair. Then we can call the nearby town and let them know the bridge is broken. It's happened before. We have enough supplies to last us for weeks. Well, I felt myself ease up. She was right. We were planning on chilling at the house anyways, so essentially nothing had changed. Costas still looked sullen. But there's no internet. Tina turned towards him. It won't kill you, she said. Who knows? Costas replied. Why don't you and Adam go play outside? Tina added mockingly. Fine, Costas replied. He turned around, grabbed his rucksack from the couch, and dragged me outside with him. Come on, Adam. Let's go check the other side of the mountain. Maybe the earthquake shook loose something else. We strode through the thick forest. Trees stood huge and ancient. The forest held an untouched beauty. After a while, the forest began to thin out. In the distance, we saw a huge, rocky mountainside rise up before us. We walked out of the forest. The ground was littered with small rocks and bigger boulders. The earthquake had scarred the mountainside. A huge tear ran across the rock face before us. I took a seat on a boulder and drank some water as Costas followed the tear and disappeared around the corner. A few moments later, he called out my name. I hurried towards him. The tear in the wall's surface had exposed the entrance of a cave. His hands held a stone tablet. Look at that, he exclaimed excitedly, pointing at markings cut in the stone. I traced the carvings with my finger, extracting the moss and dirt which had accumulated over the years. The tablet looked old, very old. The language was foreign to me. Is that Greek? I asked. Costas shrugged. Maybe some ancient form. I stared at him. Aren't you supposed to be Greek? Costas looked at me with wounded pride. Bro, I grew up in Jersey. I sniggered and took a picture of the tablet. What are you doing? Oh, a good friend of mine, Lucas, studied ancient Greek literature. If it is ancient Greek, he'll be able to tell us. I sent the picture to Lucas only to receive an error message in return. Costas sighed. Guess you'll have to be patient until the network's back up. Costas had taken a couple of steps to the entrance of the cave. We should check it out, he said. What? Why? Costas beamed at me. Who knows what the ancient Greeks might have left in there? Don't you want to find out? I stared at the bottomless darkness within the cave. It didn't seem inviting. Come on, Costas encouraged me. Where's your sense of adventure? I sighed, knowing Costas would not be dissuaded. Fine, but not too long. Costas slapped my shoulder in excitement. We shuffled into the cave. The darkness absorbed us. Only a thin stroke of sunlight accompanied us in there, and soon I had to stop. The air was heavy and smelled foul, like it was rotting. My head began to spin. Costas pulled his shirt over his nose and indicated for me to do the same. "What is that smell?" I asked. Costas shrugged. "Volcanic fumes?" We shuffled a couple more meters into the cave, and then the sunlight stopped, abruptly, as if the light itself dared not venture further. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" I whispered. "I can't see anything." "Hang on," Costas replied, and I heard him rummage in his rucksack. He pushed a flashlight into my hands. "Here, use this. I still have an LED in there somewhere." I turned on the flashlight and watched the thin ray of light pierce through the surrounding gloom. Suddenly everything before me seemed to glisten, like silver strands in the dark. I held out my arm and walked forwards. My hand connected with something sticky. It felt like dried glue. "Oh, here it is," Costas exclaimed. I heard him press a button, and after a brief moment of buzzing, the LED light turned on, illuminating our surroundings. I yelled and fell backwards. The shiny silver strands were webs. My hand was entangled by cobwebs. I stared around the cavern. It was massive. The LED light only illuminated a fraction of it, but what I saw made me shudder. A myriad of webs surrounded us, spreading forward like an endless silk labyrinth. The thick strands disappeared into the dark. It held a morbid beauty, and I felt my heartbeat rise. "Costas," I hissed, "we need to get out of here." "Chill out, bro. It's just webs." "Look at the size of them," I pleaded. "These webs must have been spun over generations," Costas said with a smile. He seemed completely enamored by our find. Must have been his professional curiosity. "Look at that." He whispered more to himself than to me. "Must be the first humans to set foot in here in hundreds of years. Maybe for a good reason." Costas waved away my worries, opting to walk to the nearest wall and inspect the web which clung to it. He touched the silk and held it between his fingers. "Amazing," he muttered. "These strands are unlike anything I've seen before. Maybe this cave is filled with unknown species." I shuffled towards him and grabbed his arm. "We should go." Costas rolled his eyes at my visible unease. 5 minutes, okay?" "Fine," I said, and left him alone. The air was making me feel drowsy. I wandered a couple of meters further into the cave. A thick strand of silk clung to the wall beside me and disappeared into the dark before me. Absent-mindedly, I plucked it like a guitar string. The strand vibrated as a soft twang resonated from this string. Soon it died out, and, well, I'd had enough. I turned around ready to make my way back to the entrance. "I'm going to wait for you outside," I called at Costas. And then I heard it. A soft twang resonated behind me. I spun around to see the strand of web gently vibrate up and down. My body froze. I could barely breathe as my eyes followed the strand further into the dark. My legs were shaking. My body wanted to bolt out of there. Grab Costas, drag him out of the cave, find the girls and take the first flight back out of here. And yet, I could not move. My mind would not allow it. And a strange feeling took hold of me, almost like a premonition of impending disaster, yet my curiosity had the better of me. I grabbed the strand and shuffled deeper into the dark. I was here now. I had to know what else was. The thick strand of silk in my hand slowly stopped vibrating as I shuffled deeper into the cave. The air became more foul with every step. I had difficulty breathing, and the light of my flashlight emitted a pathetic beam into the encroaching darkness. I turned around and saw a faint dimple of light where I knew Costas was standing. Although I couldn't have gone more than 30 meters, he already seemed unnaturally far away. The light from his LED lamp appeared to be swallowed up completely. My flashlight began to flicker, and then it went out. "Oh, come on," I pleaded as I smacked the flashlight with my hands. It emitted a faint buzzing before reverting into stillness. The darkness engulfed me. I felt it weigh me down. I began to panic. "Shit," I muttered repeatedly as I slapped my flashlight harder. Suddenly, the flashlight emitted a beam of light, stronger than before. It pierced the veiled darkness, illuminating what lay before me. My body froze as I witnessed the colossal abomination hanging in its web in front of me, its body a vast mass of bulbous malignancy. The creature's scabby legs sprouted in every direction and disappeared into the surrounding darkness. A greasy coat of long hairs covered them. Its coat was of such a deep shade of black it seemingly absorbed all the light from my torch. Many eyes focused on mine. A terrible hunger radiated out of them. I could barely breathe. A silent wail escaped my lips. I felt my heart pound in my chest, almost as if it wanted to burst from my body. Then the black mass lurched forwards. Two enormous fangs snapped above my face as it slobbered over me. A hideous stench burned my nostrils. The flashlight fell out of my hands as I stumbled backwards. Then I was running. I moved with an urgency I'd never felt before. I wanted to shout at Costas, but nothing escaped my throat. I darted through the dark until I saw him. Without offering any explanation, I grabbed his arm and yanked him with me. "Hey!" he exclaimed. "What's the matter with you?" I turned around ready to shout at him, but I lost my footing and fell to the ground hard. I must have passed out for a moment because when I opened my eyes, I was outside of the cave, Costas hovering above me, looking worried. "Thank God," he said, visibly worried. "You really had me scared for a moment." My body jerked forwards. The image of the creature crashed over me. I grabbed Costas' shoulder and began to stammer, unable to find the words. "Adam," Costas said. "Are you all right, buddy? You look really pale." "Yes, something down there. I saw something." "Well, of course there are things down there. Who do you imagine spun those webs?" "Shut up," I yelled. Costas fell silent. "There's something else down there. I saw it. I saw a monster." Costas smirked. "Adam, buddy, it's the air in the cave. The low oxygen content's messing with your brain. You shouldn't have gone deeper inside without a mask. That, and you hit your head pretty badly." "I know what I saw." Costas threw his hands up apologetically. Okay, he said. "You don't believe me?" Costas turned to me with a smile. "Well, I guess there's only one way to find out." Costas fished out 2 walkie-talkies from his bag and tossed one to me. He also threw me some band-aids and pointed at my head. "You should fix that." I touched my head and winced. I felt blood. "Right, you stay here," Costas said. "I'll go check it out." "Don't!" "Enough, Adam." Costas silenced me. Before I could protest any further, he disappeared into the cave. I didn't want to let him go alone, yet my body refused to follow. I felt like a coward. The minutes crept by as I paced up and down the entrance, trying to rationalize what I had seen. My train of thought was interrupted by static from my walkie-talkie as Costas' voice became audible. "I found something. Did you see it?" "No," Costas replied, unable to mask the irritation in his voice. "I found something else." "What?" "Hold on. I'm coming back." The static cut off. I felt nauseated. Soon after I heard Costas' footsteps bounce off the cave walls. Then the contours of his body became visible. He held something in his arms. Then, as he stepped into the light, I saw that his arms held the body of a young, naked woman. My mouth fell open in shock. I found her deeper inside the cave, in the direction you disappeared in. I didn't understand. How could I have missed her? Costas placed her on the floor. The woman's eyes were only half open. She seemed to drift in and out of consciousness. Costas began to rummage in his bag. I stared at the woman. She appeared little more than a girl. She looked frail and weakened, her lips cracked and chafed, her body emaciated. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. It stood in dark contrast with the dark matted hair which draped down her back. Her bones protruded from her skin, and her eyes had sunk deep in their hollow sockets. Her pupils were dark, almost completely black, yet something lingered deep inside them, like the last embers of a fire. She looked skeletal. An odor of decay clung to her. "There we go," Costas said gently, as he wrapped an emergency blanket around the girl. Then he picked her up, and we set off towards the house. As we walked through the forest, I felt a deep sense of pity for the girl. Who knows what horrors she'd witnessed? Well, I also felt ashamed that I'd missed her. If Costas hadn't gone back into the cave, the young girl would have died due to my negligence. I shuddered at the thought of her trapped in the cave with that thing. I promised myself I wouldn't be paralyzed by fear again. Tina and Lara took care of her when we returned. They bathed the girl and, after giving her a thorough examination, put her to bed in the guest room. I was pacing around the living room while Costa sat on the sofa. After a while, he clicked his tongue. "Would you stop?" he snapped. I shot him an angry look. "Is this still about what you think you saw in the cave?" "I know what I saw in the cave," I answered defensively. Costa sighed. "Monsters don't exist, Adam." I was about to argue with him when the door to the guest room opened and Tina and Lara walked out. Lara grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "Poor girl," she mumbled. "Her body's completely malnourished. God knows how long she was trapped in there." "Has she spoken yet?" Costas asked. Tina shook her head. "I don't think she can. Whatever happened in that cave scarred her psyche. She must have experienced a terrible trauma. I can't be sure, but she might have a form of selective mutism. We'll take her to hospital once help arrives." I looked at Costas. He seemed deep in thought. Then he threw up his arms in the air, defeated. "Fine. Tell them." Lara furrowed her brow. "Tell us what?" I scratched the back of my head. "Well, I saw something in the cave." "What?" Tina asked. I told them. A heavy silence hung in the room after I'd finished. "That's not possible," Tina finally said, breaking the silence. "That's what I said," Costas muttered. I looked at Lara, hoping she'd believe me, but I immediately saw that she didn't. Lara squeezed my hand again. "Maybe the air played tricks on you, babe. Your flashlight could have reflected off some stalactites." Tina pointed at the bandaged gash on my head. "And you hit your head." I was getting angry now. "What about the webs?" Costas jumped up from the couch. "I told you, the webs accumulated over generations." I looked at all three of them, doubt clearly displayed on their faces. "Fine," I said, as I got up and walked towards the guest room, slamming the door behind me. The girl sat up in the bed. She looked frightened, like a deer caught in headlights. Now that she'd been bathed, I saw just how young she was. She couldn't have been older than 18. There was something about her that I just couldn't place. An air of sadness clung to the girl, as if she'd experienced more tragedy than her age should allow. Yet the same latent intensity I'd seen earlier still burned deep inside her sunken eyes. "Hello," I said sheepishly. "I'm Adam." The girl cocked her head to the side. The movement appeared to put a strain on her body as she winced. I pointed at myself. "Adam," I said. "Adam." Then I pointed at her. "Who are you?" The girl stared at me. Then she opened her mouth, but to no avail. She abruptly closed it as tears formed in her eyes. I sat down next to her. "Don't worry, we'll figure it out." The girl grabbed my hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong. Then she slowly drifted into a deep sleep. The night slowly crept in as the day passed without further incident. We decided one of us should sleep on the couch in the guest room to watch over the girl. Costas offered to take the first night. Around 4 a.m. I suddenly awoke, feeling disoriented. I thought I'd heard movement on the roof, but it must have been a dream as everything was quiet. I gazed at Lara. Her long, blonde locks draped around her face as her mouth hung slightly open. I smiled. All of a sudden, a piercing scream tore through the night. Lara and I shot out of the bed. That was Tina. We ran out of the room and down the stairs. Tina stood alone in the guest room. She was violently shaking. Tears rolled down her face. Her eyes stood wide in terror. She almost looked demented. Lara rushed over to her. "What happened?" Tina muttered something uncomprehendingly and slowly pointed a shaking finger towards the window. Lara moved forwards and peered out of the window, and her body froze. I hesitantly moved beside her, afraid of the inevitable. The moon was full. It cast a veil of white light which shone brightest at the edge of the forest. That's where I saw it, a colossal mass of darkness crawling towards the trees. The creature was difficult to make out. As it slithered closer to the tree line, a stroke of moonlight hit it. Lara gasped beside me. I thought she was going to faint. The creature was only momentarily lit up, yet it scared her beyond anything she had ever seen. The moonlight also illuminated something else. The creature dragged something behind it. It looked like a sack of spun silver. I recognized the same webbed silk that I'd seen in the cave. The sack bounced off the ground. I watched it tear. The upper half of an arm dangled out. I felt sick. The creature must have sensed it was being observed, because before it disappeared beyond the trees, it turned round. The same cluster of eyes I'd seen earlier focused on me. I felt an insatiable hunger emanate from them. Involuntarily, I stumbled backwards. The creature snapped its massive fangs and disappeared into the night. We stood motionless. Then I felt myself snap back to the room. I looked at Lara. All color had drained from her face. She looked frozen in time. "I'm going after it." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Please, don't." I wiped away her tears and kissed her forehead. That thing took Costas and the girl. I need to find them. You take care of Tina. Before she could protest, I darted out of the room, grabbing the shotgun from the wall and a flashlight from the table on my way out. The night was dreary. Cold air stung my face as I sprinted towards the tree line. Tracks littered the ground around me. Large holes stained the earth to my left and right, where the thing's legs had hit the ground. The distance between both sets of tracks must have been around 6 or 7 meters. The trail of its sack was clearly visible between the tracks. I sprinted along them. The air was foul and heavy. A putrid smell hit my nostrils. As I darted through the forest, my mind was still trying to comprehend what I'd seen. What had we discovered in the deep? The air seemed to thicken the closer I got to the cave. It felt unnaturally dense. My movements became slow, and then I saw the cave's entrance and the darkness which lingered inside. My feet skidded to a halt. I wanted to leave, to run away and never look back, but I couldn't. Every fiber of my body screamed in protest as I forced myself to advance. I raised my shotgun as I slowly shuffled forward into the cave. "Costas," I hissed. my voice barely audible. I took a couple of breaths. "Costas," I repeated, louder. My voice bounced through the cavern. I turned on my flashlights. A beam of light gingerly cut through the shadows. I watched the light frantically move around the cavern before realizing I was the one aimlessly turning around. So I forced myself to stand still. All I could hear was my own laborious breathing. The sound of falling rocks echoed behind me. I spun around only to see a gigantic, hairy leg disappear into the darkness. I almost fell back, but managed to steady myself and raise my gun, but all my flashlight illuminated were cobwebs and rocks. "Costas!" I yelled, more forcefully, but to no avail. Sweat poured down my face and teared my eyes. Please answer," I pleaded. My voice disappeared into the darkness. I began to shuffle back to the entrance of the cave. My head was spinning, the air was too thick, my body was quickly fatiguing. More falling stones. I turned towards the sound to find the girl staring at me. Mere shreds hung where her clothes had been. "Oh, thank God," I said, and rushed to her. I draped my jacket over her. She looked at me with big eyes full of fear. Her mouth opened in a silent scream as she pointed a bony finger behind me. I turned around. There it stood before me, an enormous bloated mass of dark. The creature unveiled itself before me. A scabby, hairy leg sprouted from its abdomen and disappeared into the surrounding shadows. Its head loomed towards me. Its fangs clicked as it crawled closer. I raised my shotgun, yet for the briefest of moments I hesitated to pull the trigger. There was something in the creature's eyes. The insatiable hunger they'd radiated earlier seemed to have dissipated and was replaced with something else. For a moment, as our eyes met, all I saw was fear. It seemed different from before, less malign. Its fangs snapped once more as it tentatively crawled further towards me. Then its many eyes registered the girl behind me. The creature shrieked and bared its fangs, snapping them as it lunged towards us. I leveled my shotgun just in time to get off a shot. The scatter hit the creature, and it fell back in shrieks of pain. Its eyes stared at me, almost as if in shock. I raised the shotgun once more, ready to end it, but before I could squeeze the trigger, the black mass before me swept its legs. A spray of rubble hit me and pushed me to the floor. Instantly, I scrambled back to my feet and turned towards the creature, but it had disappeared. My flashlight, once again, only illuminated thick cobwebs. They sparkled like silver as I frantically turned around, ready to shoot. The creature was gone. It must have retreated further into the cave. I turned towards the girl. She was cowering in the corner. Her body shivered almost uncontrollably. "It's okay," I said as I grabbed her hand, "but we need to go." I pulled her to her feet and dragged her to the entrance, all the while holding my shotgun aimed into the cave in case the creature returned. Once we'd reached the entrance to the cave and stepped into the sunrise, I turned towards the girl. The tremor in her body had subsided. Now that we'd escaped the cave, she looked more composed. I grabbed her hand. "Where's the other man?" I asked. She looked at me with big doe eyes. "Where is Costas?" As I said his name, tears began to stream down her cheeks. She fell into my arms and sobbed uncontrollably, and I felt her body go limp when she passed out. The strain of the ordeal must have taken its toll. I lifted her up in my arms and walked back towards the house, staring at the girl. Again, I found myself wondering what she'd been through. What was her connection to the creature? What was going on here? Endless questions drowned my mind. As I stared at the girl, I couldn't help but realize she looked considerably better than the previous day. Tina and Lara had washed and fed her last night, yet that couldn't have drastically improved her like this. Her body had lost its emaciated appearance, She no longer looked like skin stretched over a skeleton. Colour had returned to her cheeks, almost as if she was healthier. It perplexed me. Could that have been from one day of care? My train of thought was abruptly interrupted as I caught sight of the house before us. What was I going to tell Tina? As I walked through the door, Lara flew into my arms, almost crushing the girl. "Oh, thank goodness," she whispered. Lara let go of me and stepped back. She looked at the girl in my arms, and then I followed her gaze out of the door. "Costas?" I slowly shook my head. Tears began to roll down her cheeks as she gently brushed my face. It took Lara a while to compose herself. I'd laid the girl down on the sofa. I told Lara I'd go talk to Tina, but she insisted on doing it herself. "You go and eat something," Lara had said. Although I wasn't hungry, I was too exhausted to argue. I walked to the kitchen and forced myself to make a sandwich. As I grabbed the bread, I heard a piercing wail come from Tina's room. It filled the house. The sound churned my stomach. My hands began to shake. I briefly allowed my mind to drift back to the cave. I saw the creature before me. I couldn't help but wonder what terrible fate had befallen Costas. Horrific visions of him and the creature flashed before my eyes. I dropped the plate in my hands. I watched it as it fell to the floor and broke into pieces. It almost felt like slow motion. I dropped to my knees and began picking up the pieces. Then I started crying. Tears streamed down my face, blurring my vision. An uncontrollable helplessness spread through my body. I couldn't stop. I sat on the floor for a couple of minutes, unable to do anything else but cry. I felt terrible for not being able to save my friend. I felt disgusted by my own fear, but most of all I felt terrified of what was to come. We still had to survive until we could call for help. I was losing hope fast. That thing had drained my spirit. I took some deep breaths and forced myself to get to my feet. No, I thought as I wiped the tears from my eyes. I couldn't allow myself to give in to despair. I had to be strong, if not for myself, then for Lara. I couldn't let anything happen to the woman I loved. I walked back into the living room. Lara sat in a chair, absent-mindedly staring at the girl lying on the sofa. She jumped when I placed my hand on her shoulder. "How's Tina?" Lara shrugged. "Oh, I gave her something to calm her nerves, and a sleeping pill from her bottle." I sighed and sat down beside her. The minutes slowly crept by in silence. "What was that thing?" Lara finally said. I shook my head. "I don't know." Lara turned towards me. The colour had still not returned to her face. The lines around her eyes and mouth had tightened. The mere sight of that creature had aged her. "And who is she?" Lara whispered, indicating the girl. "If the cave only became accessible after the earthquake, how did she get in there? And how did she survive being in there with that thing?" "I don't know," I repeated. The truth is, I'd been pondering those exact questions since we'd found the girl. Something was wrong here. I knew I was missing something. I just couldn't see it yet. The rest of the day passed in relative silence. Lara spent most of it sitting in Tina's room, while I spent most of it sitting in the living room with the girl. Every once in a while, I had an overwhelming desire to go to Lara and hold her in my arms to comfort her. But I couldn't muster the strength to do so. There was a restlessness that I just could not shake. Both Tina and the girl woke up sporadically to eat or drink, only to then fall back into their sleep. The sun had begun to set when I next saw Tina. I was deep in thought when I noticed the door of her room opening. She stepped out and walked into the living room. She looked disheveled and frail, yet a silent determination burned within her eyes. I hurriedly got to my feet. I'm sorry," I began. She silenced me with a wave of her arm. "Don't," she said, her voice hoarse. "There's nothing you could have done. It was that thing." Deep hate suddenly emanated from her eyes. thing took him. It's to blame for this. I opened my mouth and closed it, unable to find the words. Tina's eyes flashed towards the girl on the sofa. Poor girl, she whispered. What horrors must she have gone through? Then her eyes fixated back on me. I want that thing dead. Do you understand? I want to kill it. I shuddered at the notion of facing off with the creature once more, but I nodded at Tina. A sigh of relief escaped her lips. Thank you, she muttered, and returned to her room. A couple of moments later, Lara appeared. She looked better. Some of the colour had returned to her face. She walked over to me and grabbed my hand. She gently placed her head against my shoulder. She's asleep. Whatever you said helped her. I looked as the sun set out of the window. Given what had happened the previous night, it stood reason that if the creature would return to the house, it would come at night. I'm going to take watch during the night. Lara broke away from me. I felt her body shake. You think it'll come back tonight? I don't know, I answered. But if it does, I want to be prepared. I've shot the creature before. I know it can be hurt. An uneasiness crept back into Lara's face. I wanted to say something, but words escaped me. Instead, I nodded towards the girl on the sofa. It's probably best if we put her in bed with Tina. Lara nodded absent-mindedly. I want you to stay in the room with them. Lock the door and don't come out. Before Lara could protest, I lifted the girl off the couch and walked into Tina's room, carefully placing the girl on the bed beside her. Lara drifted into the room behind me. I kissed her again. Don't worry, we'll be fine, I said, and gave her a weak smile. Lara did not reply, opting to slump back into the chair next to the bed. I walked out of the room, swung the shotgun over my shoulder, and stalked into the increment darkness. The night was warm, the sky clear. I stared as the mountains stretched out before me, their beauty now tainted. I could not help but wonder what other secrets they held, and the thought disheartened me. I positioned myself on the steps of the porch and screened the forest ahead of me. I sat, bathing in starlight, as the hours slowly drifted by. My brain was on autopilot. I felt like an observer outside of my own body. My eyelids grew heavy. The front door suddenly slammed shut. I spun around to find Lara standing before me. I've come to relieve you, she said. I'm not tired, I lied, while stifling a yawn. Lara sat down next to me. We sat in silence for a while. I checked my watch. It was 4:30 a.m. The sun would rise soon. Apparently the creature would not be showing itself after all. You need sleep, Adam. I'm fine. Just sit with me for a while. Lara's expression turned pensive. What is it? I asked. Lara shrugged. Something's bothering me about the girl. I can't shake the feeling she's involved in this somehow. Involved in this? Lara turned to face me. You must have thought about that as well. It doesn't make sense. So far, whenever that thing shows itself, she's always involved somehow. I know, I mumbled. I think she knows more than she's letting on. I think she has a part to play in all of this. I nodded, stifling yet another yawn. Go sleep, Lara said in a tone which allowed no argument. If you exhaust yourself, you won't be of use to anyone. Maybe Lara's right, I thought to myself. My body and mind were fatigued. I needed rest. I handed Lara the gun. As she took it, I held on to her arm. If you see anything, even if you aren't sure, shoot and run back into the house. Yes. I held on to her arm. Promise me. I promise. Then the front door banged shut again. We turned around to see the girl gazing at us. Her eyes stood alert as they shot from Lara to me and back again. She hugged herself. She stood in the morning air. You shouldn't be out here, I said as I motioned her to go back inside. She shook her head and grunted, running past me towards Lara. Lara shuffled backwards, her face reluctant. The girl looked at her pleadingly with her doe-like eyes and gently took her hand. I saw Lara's hesitation disappear like snow in the sun. I wanted to protest, but Lara shushed me. "It's okay. I could use a little company." I was too exhausted to argue. I needed to sleep. "Okay," I muttered. "Be careful. Rest." Lara soothed and grabbed the girl's hand. I watched them sit down on the porch stairs. The girl placed her head on Lara's shoulder, burying her face in her golden locks. I walked through the front door contemplating whether I would eat something, but I was simply too tired. I dropped myself on the sofa and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. My eyes suddenly ripped open and I began to cough. Sunlight poured through the windows. I jumped to my feet, panic instantly taking a hold of me. The air hung heavy. It smelled putrid and foul. Only one thought shot through my mind. Lara. I sprang to my feet and ran outside. My head began to spin. The shotgun lay lazily in the grass before the porch. There was no sign of Lara. I coughed. The air seemed void of any oxygen. Tears streamed down my face. I ran towards the gun. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a myriad of punctures in the ground. Fresh tracks. My heart went into overdrive. I fell onto my knees and vomited. "Lara!" I yelled. "Lara!" It was to no avail. Only then did I think about Tina and the girl. I ran back into the house just in time to see Tina storm out of her room, the girl at her heels. Tina saw my tear-stained face, and she knew. "No," she cried. The girl took her hand and looked at me. There was something in her eyes I couldn't quite place, but I had no time to think about it. "Stay here," I yelled, and stormed out of the house. I grabbed the shotgun and sprinted down the field and into the forest. I had to find Lara. I had to save her. "This is your fault. You left her alone. You should have been there with her. You should have protected her." I could hardly breathe as a pit formed in my stomach, guilt crashing over me. After what seemed like a lifetime, I reached the cave. Without thought, I stormed inside. "Lara!" I yelled over and over as I ventured further into the darkness. I frantically spun around, trying to illuminate as much of the cave as I could. A desperate hope took hold of me. I'd found the girl here last time. I could find Lara. I'd gone deeper into the cave than the previous times, and I could barely breathe. The air felt so putrid, it made me heave. I pulled my t-shirt tighter over my face, hoping it would alleviate the smell. It didn't. I stopped. Couldn't go any further. My legs started shaking. My body protested. I knew that if I went deeper into the dark, I would not return. The light of my flashlight began to flicker, and then it went out. Instantly I was swallowed by my shadows. A chill crept up my spine as I peered around the darkness. In the distance I could make out the faintest of glimmers. I knew that was where the entrance of the cave was. I began slowly to shuffle towards it. The light became brighter. I could see the entrance. Now that the flashlight had given up life, I couldn't muster the courage to call for Lara anymore. Suddenly I felt vulnerable. A faint echo of falling stones emanated from behind me. I spun around, lifting the shotgun to my shoulder, sweat pouring down my face. I wiped it from my brow. I could barely breathe. I peered into the darkness, yet there was nothing I could see. The rumbling of falling rocks rose from the deep. I stopped moving completely. "Lara," I said, my voice barely audible. The echo of falling rocks vanished as quickly as it had arisen. I stood in silence, too scared to move, almost too scared to breathe. The seconds ticked by, and a deafening silence returned to the cave. There was nothing there. My heartbeat began to stabilize. I sighed and wiped the sweat from my brow. I realized I was on a fool's errand. I would not find Lara in this cave. She was gone. I turned back towards the entrance. A cry escaped my lips. A cluster of eyes hung in the web above me. A faint light reflected in them. They all focused on me as if in recognition. I raised my shotgun, but a huge black leg swept the gun out of my hands. I fell backwards onto the floor. The creature dropped from the webs and landed on the floor with a loud thud, its fangs snapping at me. I crawled in the direction my gun had fallen. My arms flailed wildly around the dark, cold floor. My fingers brushed the butt of the gun, but before I could grab it, two hairy legs pinned my shoulders to the ground. The creature hung above me. Its massive head hovered over mine. Its fangs snapped. The sound vibrated through the cave. I felt saliva drop from its mouth onto my face. My eyes widened in fear. My body felt paralyzed by sheer panic. Desperately, I reached out to the shotgun. My fingers brushed the butt once more. With desperate strength, I managed to pull the gun close enough so that my hand could take a hold of it. The creature's eyes drilled into mine. Once again, I thought I saw a deep sense of helplessness reside within them. They seemed so familiar. The creature's fangs snapped, and more saliva dripped onto my face. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I gripped the butt as tight as I could, and with a last assimilation of strength, I raised the gun and shot at the hairy legs. The creature shrieked as its legs burst into pieces. Having lost its balance, the creature let go of my shoulders and fell to its left. Without thinking, I scrambled to my feet and bolted towards the entrance. I heard the creature shriek in the darkness, but it didn't seem to be following me. Cobwebs latched onto me from all sides, but I felt the adrenaline surge through my body. I pushed through the silky webs and finally burst into the morning sunlight. I fell to my knees, greedily gulping in the air. Tears poured out of my eyes as a bout of hysterical laughter burst from my lips. Then I felt bile rise up my esophagus, and I vomited again. I crawled to my feet and grabbed the gun. The temporary euphoria I'd felt disappeared instantly. It was replaced by a feeling of loss so overwhelming, I can't put it into words. I had lost Lara. She was gone. I began to walk back to the house, my mind absent of any thought. My heart felt like a maelstrom. All I could do was force my feet to keep on moving. The trees around me were basking in morning light, yet I found no comfort in its beauty. I was absent from my surroundings. I didn't notice the black mass moving through the trees beside me. Then I registered the movement out of the corner of my eye. There it stood. A swarm of eyes drilled into mine. I stood motionless. My heart sank as it dawned on me. There were more of them. For a moment, I welcomed the notion of death. It somehow seemed comforting. I couldn't bear the thought of living without Lara. I couldn't muster the strength to go on. The creature clacked its fangs again, but stayed where it was. Instead of attacking me, it bowed forward so that we were on eye level. The creature seemed different. It was smaller in stature and its coat lighter, blonder almost. The creature held my gaze, its eyes wide and gentle. There was something strangely familiar about them. I stood, perplexed, unable to comprehend the being before me. It seemed almost amicable. Suddenly my mind flooded with images of Lara. A searing anger took hold of me. I would never see her again. These things had robbed her from me. Before my mind registered my body's movements, I'd raised my shotgun towards the creature's head and pulled the trigger. The creature shrieked in agony as part of its head exploded. An unintelligible mass of pain filled the forest. Its cries tore through me. I couldn't stand it. I raised my gun once more. As I stared down the barrel, my eyes met the creature's gaze, its remaining eyes brimming with sadness and pain. I felt tears form in my eyes, yet I couldn't understand their purpose. I felt confused, and the creature sensed it. It softly clicked its fangs and gently crawled towards me. "Don't," I pleaded suddenly, unable to pull the trigger. "Don't," I repeated through tears. The creature stopped. Its remaining eyes glistened as if wet. A thick viscous liquid oozed from its wound, and then with one last shriek it turned around and stormed away from me. I clutched the tree beside me, drained of all energy as I watched it disappear. I forced myself to continue through the forest. I had to get back to Tina, to the girl. It was only us now. I couldn't fail them as well. Waves of pain shot through my legs as I forced them to move. Soon enough, I caught sight of the house. The reflecting sunlight made the window sparkle. It looked idyllic, though the thought soured in my mouth. I pulled out my phone, but still no signal. It was hopeless. Tina and the girl stood on the porch as I approached. The girl ran towards me and threw her arms around me. I was taken aback by her strength. I felt like I was being crushed. Then she let go and looked into my face. She opened her mouth and closed it again. I looked away, unable to meet her gaze. Tina grabbed my hand and ushered me inside. She sat me down at the table, put a plate of food before me. I saw her lips moving, but I didn't hear her words. "Adam," I heard her say, her voice far away. "Adam," she repeated and grabbed my shoulder. I slowly looked at her. "We need to get out of here." "We can't," I whispered. "Not until we can call for help." Oh, Tina threw up her arms. "We can go ourselves. Take the girl and walk." "Walk where?" I interrupted. "The bridge is broken. We'd have to climb down the ravine without any gear. It'd be suicide." "So we do nothing?" Tina snapped. I looked at her, and my anger flared. "What would you have me do?" Tina stood up and began pacing up and down the kitchen. "Those things are coming for us, Adam. They took Costas, they took Lara. Which one of us is next, eh? They're picking us off one by one, and your plan is to sit here and do nothing?" "There's nothing I can do," I yelled. "We're stuck on this fucking mountain. Let's not forget it was your idea to come here. This is your house." My words cut Tina deeply. I could see her struggle to hold back her tears, and I instantly regretted my outburst. I sighed and fell back into my chair. "I'm sorry," I muttered. "I don't blame you for any of this. It's not your fault." Tina faced me. A silent fury rose in her eyes. "I know this was my idea, Adam. I'll have to live with this for the rest of my life, if we even survive." "Tina!" I wanted to grab her hand, but she slapped me away. "Don't touch me," she said coolly, and walked out of the room. The girl had stood motionless in the corner of the kitchen, attentively observing our exchange. "What?" I said annoyedly as our eyes met. I stood up and walked back into the living room, opting to lie down on the sofa. My eyes grew heavy. I felt exhausted both emotionally and physically. Yet I knew I couldn't sleep. For all my mixed feelings, I knew I had to protect Tina and the girl as best I could. I licked my lips. They felt chaffed. Then, as if on cue, the girl walked into the living room carrying a glass of water. "Thank you," I said appreciatively. "I'm sorry for what I said earlier." The girl stood motionless and stared at me. Her expression was hard. She must have sensed that I'd hurt Tina. I gave her an appraising look. Her appearance had further improved since I'd left her with Lara the previous night. More colour had returned to her cheeks, and her bones no longer stuck out against her skin. Her hair flowed like a waterfall, and she seemed to glow. The girl motioned towards the glass of water I was awkwardly holding. I gulped down the glass in one go. The girl cocked her head to the side ever so gently, yet the motion unnerved me. I stood up. My legs felt like jelly. I stumbled forward and fell to my knees. The girl took some steps back, all the while staring at me with a completely blank expression. Whatever innocence she'd displayed disappeared. As I fell to the ground, I saw the girl was holding Tina's bottle of sleeping pills in her hands. What have you done? I slurred as I fell forward. My eyelids slowly closed, and the last thing I saw was the girl's impassive face as she looked at me. Something dark danced in her eyes. My mind drifted in and out of consciousness. Bright lights danced before my eyes. I felt like I was floating, like I was embraced. I felt comfortable. The world was finally at peace. Then my eyes burst open and I felt like a baby torn from its mother's womb. I was confronted with reality. I panted loudly as I sat up on the floor. My head spun. It was still sunny outside, yet the air felt dense and dreary. The faint smell of rot still lingered in the house. I massaged my temples, hoping to push away the drowsiness. I crawled to my feet. "Tina," I muttered through dry lips. There was no answer. "Tina!" I yelled louder and shuffled to her room. It was empty. I knew it would be. There was nobody in the house. I was alone. I thought about the girl. God, why had she drugged me? I stumbled towards the kitchen and gulped down 2 glasses of water and splashed some in my face. It made me feel better. I was awake. I walked back to the living room and sat on the sofa, pondering everything that had occurred. What am I missing? I was surprised by my own calmness. I could only explain it as a stage past desperation and despair. I think, in my heart, I'd begun to realize what fate had in store for me. I'd lost my friends. I had lost the girl who I would have married. If I was to disappear next, then so be it. But I felt determined. I would put up a fight. An idea crystallized in my mind. I went to the cellar and dragged up 2 small barrels of gasoline. I checked my watch. It was early evening. It would still be a while before the sun went down. I swung the shotgun over my shoulder and began to drag the first barrel outside. Oof, it was slow work. I was drenched in sweat when I reached the entrance of the cave. After I carefully set down the first barrel next to the entrance, I peered inside and listened. It was quiet, peaceful almost. I forced myself to run back to the house and began to drag the second barrel to the cave. The sun sat low in the sky as I reached the cave once more. I could barely feel my arms, and my body ached all over. The incumbent sunset made the cave look sinister. I had to hurry. I wanted to get this done while the sun was still out. The thought of being stuck outside in the dark made me restless. I peered into the cave once more. There was nothing. All I could hear were pockets of air quietly hissing in the deep. The putrid smell of the cave seemed fainter, or maybe I'd just gotten used to it. I dragged in the first barrel and pulled it to the wall where the thick cobwebs began. I doused the webs in as much gasoline as I could until the barrel ran out. The combined smell of gasoline and rotting air made me gag. I hurried outside and grabbed the other barrel, dousing the cobwebs on the other side of the cave wall as well. Suddenly the noise of falling rocks resonated from deeper inside the cave. They were coming. I knew it. I tipped over the barrel and kicked it down into the cave. The metal bounced off the stone with deafening noise. I heard shrieks rise up from the dark. Frantically, I sprinted back to the entrance, where I'd poured a trail of gasoline. I got the lighter out of my pocket, but it fell to the ground. I panicked. I snatched it from the ground and tried to light up the lighter with my clammy hands. A handful of sparks burst out at the end, but no fire. In the dark, I saw the outline of humongous bodies approaching. 12 eyes peered at me. Panic took over. I desperately tried to get the lighter to work. They were visible now. Crawling towards me from the dark, 2 creatures, their fat bodies dragging over the floor. One was slightly bigger than the other, and both were snapping their fangs. My vision began to blur. The lighter hissed, and a flame appeared. I threw the light into the puddle of gasoline just as the creature's hairy legs shot at me out of the dark. Too late. Fire burst from the ground. I fell back on the floor. The hair on the creature's legs singed. I saw fear dispelled from their eyes as they crawled back to escape the fire. By now the fire had reached the cobwebs and a huge inferno took hold. It lit up the whole cave. I put my hands in front of my face. The heat was unbearable. With every passing second, the fire engulfed more of the cave, and the creatures shrieked as they sunk back into the darkness in a desperate attempt to escape the flames. I could see their bodies engulfed by fire. Their screams of desperation turned into wails of pain. Their bodies violently convulsed as they retreated further into the dark. I stumbled further back. The smoke was stinging my eyes. I coughed. My lips felt cracked and my throat was dry. I could still hear them. Their agony rose out of the deep. The concoction of pain and suffering pierced the air. I turned away from the noise, my body shaking. Then the shrieks of suffering turned into wails of agony so intense I could not shake the thought that it sounded human. Suddenly a deep rumbling rose out of the dark. Small stones began to fall, then bigger ones. The earth began to shake as the cave collapsed. Its ancient cobwebs must have held the cave together somehow. With a deafening bang which seemed to last for minutes, the ground shook as the cave collapsed. Huge boulders fell in front of the exit, cutting off the entrance permanently. I covered my face as a cloud of dust swept up before me. And then it was over. Everything was quiet. A feeling of elation rose up inside of me. I'd done it. I had ended the nightmare. I was certain the two creatures in the cave could not have survived that inferno. I was also convinced that the other creature, which I'd shot in the forest, would succumb to its wounds. But the feeling of elation dissipated as quickly as it had arisen. It was not over yet. The girl was still out there. Her role in this horror still eluded me. From the beginning, she'd been at the center of it all. But how was she connected to those things? I shook my head, frustrated at not being able to figure it out. I had to find her. She had played a role in the disappearances of Kostas, Lara, and Tina. The girl had to atone for what she had done, for what she had taken from me. I briefly wondered whether I'd be able to kill her. The thought made me nauseous, and I quickly pushed it out of my mind. I was no murderer. I could never kill another human. Lost in thought, I paid no attention to the path I was taking. I found myself deep inside the forest. I turned around, ready to go back in the direction from which I'd come, when I stopped. An ominous sense of foreboding plagued me. I noticed the dirt before me now was stained by blood. Its trail turned to my right. I felt my heartbeat rise. I felt compelled to follow this trail. I knew I had to. After about 5 minutes, I stepped into a little clearing. A body lay in its middle. Golden hair sparkled in the evening sun. The shotgun fell out of my hands. My body turned cold as I hovered forwards. My ears began to ring. My head felt like it was going to split open. I knew I must have been crying out in pain. I felt the vibrations coming from my mouth, yet I couldn't hear them. Once I reached the body, I fell to my knees. Lara was dead. I hesitantly put my arms around her and lifted her from the long grass. I fell back in panic. Half of her face was gone. Her head had been blown apart. Almost half was missing. I stood frozen, staring at the blood and tissue dripping from her head. Then I violently vomited. I closed my eyes and looked away, desperate to forget this image of Lara, and yet I knew I never would. It's etched in my brain for eternity. I thought about who could do such a thing, and then something passed through my mind. one small thought which made my body shake with pain. No, I thought. That's not possible. That can't be possible. I felt like I was falling into a void. A cold sense of dread spread through my veins like ice. No. I pressed my hands against my ears as if to push the thought from my mind. Something broke inside of me. It can't be real. I felt my pocket vibrate. My phone began to beep. The network towers must have been restored. I fished my phone from my pocket and stared at the text. It was from you, Lucas. I glossed over the message, my eyes fixed on the last 3 lines. It was a translation of the stone. That felt almost like a lifetime ago. My eyes reread the message. Here lies Arachne, cursed by the gods, mother of spiders. Everything fell into place. I thought about the 2 creatures in the cave, the one I'd shot in the forest. I realized part of me had known. Part of me must have known all along. The tears stopped streaming down my face. My body stopped shaking and numbness took hold. I felt nothing. In that moment, the void which had been stirring inside of me took over. All I could think about was the girl. I rose from the floor and walked out of the clearing. I didn't look back. I couldn't stand the sight of Lara any more. Before I knew it, I was sprinting. My body felt like I was an autopilot. My mind was empty. I felt neither pain nor sadness. My heart was broken, my emotions spent. I reached the house. She stood there, waiting for me, her dress slowly waving in the wind. Her appearance still pale, but no longer skeletal. She seemed vibrant with life and newfound health. Yet the girl had changed. Her eyes betrayed her. Now that she'd left all pretense behind, I saw a wild fury burn in them. I know who you are, I yelled. She cocked her head to the side. Arachne. The girl stared at me, her expression unchanged. I realized I'd forgotten my shotgun in the clearing. It didn't matter. I'd kill her with my bare hands if I had to. The girl made no attempt to move as I wrapped my hands around her throat and slammed her against the door. Die, I spat as I choked her. Her lips turned into a smile. The girl observed me like a hunter would its prey. It unnerved me. Her hands grabbed hold of mine. She slowly pulled my fingers loose. I could not match her strength. Desperately, I reached for her face. Suddenly her head shot forward and sharp teeth sank into my arm. I yelled as a burning sensation spread through my limbs. The girl let go of me and stepped back as I crumbled to the floor. I felt drained. I barely found the energy to breathe. I stared at the bite marks on my arm. The pain was unbearable. The veins in my arm bulged. I saw something black spread through them. I focused on the girl. She was licking her lips, her eyes bulging with a sense of euphoria, as if drugged. Her cheeks flushed red, and she looked revitalized. Her eyes found mine. She slowly backed off the porch and onto the grass. Suddenly she stopped and got on all fours, her eyes fixated on mine. There was something hypnotic about them. I couldn't look away. The air around us began to vibrate. I felt it being sucked in towards her. Suddenly she began to convulse. Her limbs snapped in grotesque angles. She bent forwards as her spine curved upwards. A piercing shriek escaped her throat as her dress tore, exposing her bulging body. Mere seconds had passed, and yet I could have sworn I heard every bone in her body break. The skin around her bones burst apart and fell to the ground in shreds as a coat of black mass poured out of her. Suddenly, her limbs retracted, disappearing within the malignant abyss of darkness oozing from her body. Her head snapped back, rapidly increasing in size as her eyes rolled back in their sockets. A myriad of slits ruptured around her face. The girl had completely disappeared in a maelstrom of shadows. It clung around her like a dark cocoon. Abruptly, the darkness tore open. A wave of putrid air crashed over me. It smelled foul and rotten. Massive, scabby legs sprouted from the darkness, planting themselves onto the floor. A dark body of bloated corpulence fell onto the earth with a heavy thud. A monstrous, hairy head arose out of the dark. Two massive fangs snapped, slobbering all over me. Only madness could justify the creature before me. Witnessing her transformation had left me on the brink. I felt my eyes bulge out of their sockets. It was a nightmare, and to see it meant death. I felt an all-encompassing horror. An apocalyptic fear festered within my heart as I stared into the creature's face. Its gluttonous eyes radiated an insatiable hunger I knew would never be quenched. The girl before me was nameless no more. Arachne had revealed her true form. The bulbous monstrosity sat before me in a half-crouch, as if she was waiting to pounce. A soft clicking escaped her mouth. In one last wave of desperation, I crawled through the front door and slammed it shut. I grabbed Lara's medical bag and poured out its contents beside me. My hands found the adrenaline pen, and I injected it straight into my heart, hoping it would buy me more time to finish my account. And so, we've returned to the present. I've dictated this message to you, my dear Lucas, in the hope that it finds its way to you. I've lost feeling in all my limbs. I can feel the poison course through my veins as it slowly consumes the rest of me. The pain is unbearable. Even my voice is fading. I'll muster what strength I have left to send this message to you. The creature's still outside. I can see it outside of the window. She's waiting. Her shrill cries, once so frightening, now soothe me. She knows I will eventually crawl to her. Do not come looking for me. My body will soon be gone. I'm part of her now. Oh, she calls to me. I hear Arachne's song. Like a siren, she beckons me to her ruinous shore. There's something lurking in the caves of Mexico. For the morning is bliss, the afternoon's a charm, and evening's a delight. Be wary of what comes after, for the night is unforgiving and often a murderer in disguise. Journal found in the redigging of the Yucatan Peninsula cave systems. 18.8067 degrees north. 89.3985 degrees west. Steady temperature, 25 degrees centigrade maintained. 345 meters from inception. Steep descent. June 20th, 1985. Visibility is getting exceedingly low after the first vantage point. Brittle limestone covers the precipice. Headlamps and spotlights flicker violently across some extreme locations from our initial starting point. Thermal scanners prove futile across the same unidentified areas. We're hovering around closely on the edges of our initial point. The only problem palpable is low visibility due to some kind of nebulous fog sojourning around the edges. Wandering alone without carrying a multivariate analysis on the known surface is very dangerous, for few regions on the extreme westward side of the caves have almost acute declination and ghastly deformities. The cave roof tilts perilously close to the edges of these surfaces. The entrance to the cave was surrounded by a few delirious villagers, complaining of perturbing the natural vegetation, as translated by our local companion. Later, as we showed no signs of retreating, our entreaties finally gave way. By then we were already past our mark. However, the villagers chose to linger around the cave for unfathomable purposes, eventually retreating to their shacks on the outskirts as evening drew closer. Immediately, the local workers working on the far ends of the cave system spotted certain distinct cave paintings. What proceeded next amused my senses a great bit, for some workers were seemingly repelled by the prehistoric ramblings and immediately expressed wishes of abandoning that part of the labyrinth altogether. What frightened them to this extent I knew scarcely of, for I was given the tedious responsibility of studying the geometry. Hushed utterances of terrified workers filled the corridors. Some even compared the deities in the petroglyphs to the hideous Hindu god Hastur. Further in the corridors, our finds managers team, which consisted of 6 members including 2 students, suggested some great findings further ahead in the cave system. Furthermore, while progressing in the only direction hitherto suitable for trudging, one of the students from the finds manager division reported back enthralling news. An unbelievable alcove-like structure was slightly visible after moving linearly westward by hugging the cave walls for about 250 meters. These rock structures manifested into much greater sculptures, entirely man-made. This revelation sent a wave of nervous exultation. Immediately after carefully securing those artifacts, we contacted our site manager, Abigail, who upon receiving the impeccable news wasted no time in wiring our director and head of our division, who in turn congratulated us on our early success. Having been run on a sufficiently low budget, the possibility of finding something this perfect in a condition so early in our exploration was a rare occurrence and baffled our finds manager, Victor, to a great extent. The chances of a random cave-in were sufficiently low, and the relative tundra was sufficient on high altitude as well. Conversely, some parts of the cave, as scanned by a thermal scanner, revealed data of great interest. Some parts, while sufficiently inside the cave, had a steady, almost acute declination in temperature, while others, like the area near our vantage points, showed no such anomalies, and a linear declination in temperature was recorded. 18.8067 degrees north, 89.3985 degrees west. Steady temperature, 21 degrees centigrade maintained. Abnormal variations around the trove and steep declination in the pit. 140 meters from inception. Steep descent. June 21st, 1985. The exploring team yesterday did a rather meticulous and tremendous job of exploring the much-dreaded westward side of the cave. And then, only way past our deadline 300 meters from our initial descent, we were able to very safely gather some of the ostentatious artifacts. All the while, workers on the extreme ends of the perimeter recorded uncanny data. For a lichen-like substance, extremely slippery, and emanating a putrid smell, adhered to the adjoining walls of the cave and much of the surface, making walking nearly impossible and a much dangerous task. Precarious and rather intelligent rock structures on the far ends of the corridor were immediately identified and secured by workers. However, great precision and precaution had to be taken due to the alarmingly ponderous nature of the artifacts. As of the initial condition of the artifacts, we were left wondering in awe for their conditions. The seemingly ebony structures were impeccable. Not a case of mechanical erosion had affected, and the impact of rolling or weathered erosion was absent throughout. Like everything, the same gelatinous, slimy molds covered the entire region of the walls near the sepulchre, and much of the artifacts. Only a prolonged treatment of the various materials and structures plagued by the unidentified sticky gelatinous substance was needed in the laboratory. The presence of any kind of salt was rather astoundingly low, and this meant a low amount of salt crystal formation. Even today, some village folks gathered on the entrance to our dig sites, but left much earlier. Of their intention I have no clue of. After only a steady ascension of around 90 meters further westward, the limestone stalagmites got dangerously close and were distinctly visible. Some organic material similar to the ones around the initial trove covered the precipice as well, and was only identified when one of the heavier materials dropped without any prior notice on Steekman's headgear. Careful investigation of the slimy mold gives us the idea of some kind of animal excreta, preferably mammals, for these placental creatures hovering around in limestone caves are a common occurrence. The only concern projected by Gavin, the geoarchaeology manager of our division, pointed out of the low visibility, for visibility reduced drastically after 30 feet above us. Such darkness was impenetrable and rendered our 120-watt headlamps useless. Workers working in the far ends of the cave now started complaining vehemently of a noxious smell emanating from the queer sepulchre and from the great abyss. All the while, some other workers of our division complained of the same slimy, mold-like organic material dripping from the cave's precipice as well, while some even complained of a nauseating smell arising from the stone sculptures. Others reported strange radiance and heat coming from the same sepulchre which harboured most of our miniature findings. After a careful thermal scan of the abhorred stop, as termed by some men of ours in extreme delirium, after even reporting seeing some voluntary movement in the miniature statues, interesting details were recorded. The mouldy, gelatinous-like materials covering the entire range of the cave walls on the west side before the steep descent itself radiated some sort of intense heat radiation. Long presence beside the alcove and the trove put some of our men, as well as the village folks, to extreme fatigue, and some even complained of nausea. Local workers from the surrounding villages spoke in hushed speech no more, and presented their contempt in some foreign languages in sheer unison. Henceforth the dreaded miniature statue of the seemingly strikingly similar looking as of the abhorred Hindu deity Hastur, as exclaimed by one of the more timid students from our find manager's team. It was abandoned not only by the village folks, but even workers from our division had discarded it. For standing a trifle close to the portent aroused nausea, according to them. Of this I cannot vouch, for their fear alone induced a feeling of obnoxious uneasiness and guaranteed an appreciable distance from the supposed spectre. Now we must begin the fearful descent. Fearful not because I dread, but fearful because some men from both our division as well as some of the village folks repeat dreadfully of some accursed legend in the dank abyss that we must never set foot in. It is down there. We must make findings which will enhance our erudition. It is down there that our real discovery awaits, in the dank corridors of this eon-lost, centuries-sealed and eon-forgotten cave system. Today we must shun those who are delirious, fearful, or even skeptical, for we are only but a trifle away from unearthing a culture vastly forgotten and buried under 1,000 years of weathered storm. 18.8067 degrees north, 89.3985 degrees west. Temperature unknown. Can't figure out anything else. Mental state is in doldrums. June 22nd, 1985. Fear is the mother of morals. Bear in mind closely that it is only the further cave-ins that I suspect and fear, and neither the groaning of that nameless entity, nameless for I have only a little recollection and knowledge of that, and nor do the wailings of my own crew members deter or even frighten me. In our mad pursuit of the historic may God forbade us, for we displayed such dumbness and folly, stupidity, I would not like to wish even upon my nemesis. Bear in mind a singular thing more, for even in my mad dash toward the inner sanctum of this cave, where I now reside so blissfully aware of my imminent demise, I did not see any actual horror save for those eyes. Hundreds of them, even more, oh God, those eyes. We witnessed those at the inception of our excavation, but such blinding faith and under a prosaic spell of the dreary job, were we ever to take something so spectral of a thing into account? God, you can see these horrid eyes now, leering down at me, mocking me. The cave bellows in laughter, in a response to my own. A stupid I would say, stupid thing to do, to further enrage a person wholly drowned in its own seas of visual horrors in his brain, has to subject him to. I'd now like to think of the village folks who joined in our blasphemous venture. For what? I can now understand their furtiveness when around those slimy materials, and when around the hideous figurine of the Hindu deity Hasti. They were the first to descend, and the first to ascend. Such random and timely dismantling of a cave, may God forbid, shall not occur to any. The reason for the dismantling I have no clue of. I am still unable to comprehend such a disastrous consequence, for very securely and tediously we had begun our descent, and it is with utmost security we began walking on the hideous surface. But first, I'm not sure. Details are fuzzy and bleary. Why would not they be? I just escaped the wrath of an unnameable entity which is still wandering around these labyrinths, around these roofs, around these horrid corridors. I think I might have enough of a deadline to document everything. Deadlines are imperative in our field of expertise. I might embark my story, but as I say this, bear in mind just a trifle bit more, I might not be able to finish this. And so if this journal is ever recovered under this impious debris, men of science and fellow excavators alike will be tempted to disregard, and might go on at length to even call this a hoax. But it is only with the grace of God, and on the mercy of that stupid being, I am able to write this, and not under any circumstance this journal might be disregarded or be called a hoax. As it is clear, and very straightforward, extricable from my earlier notes, on the day of June 21st, on the edge of the Yucatan Peninsula. Today we were meant to descend further into the secretive Mexican caves. Having previously successfully secured various relics, we started our further descent in rather high spirit, save for some dubious village folks and some sick men from our division who were quite vehemently opposing the digging, and even asked for reshift. In the mad pursuit of unearthing ghastly secrets, we let nothing deter us, and even under the absence of few workers, we descended down the abyss. It was then, I suspect, something preternatural, of the most supernal nature, was at work. At first, some of the local workers shouted, followed by a scream of the most hideous kind. It was Matt, and his demonic screech is how I suspect something spectacularly supernatural was at play, for there resided in his guttural scream an awe of the most curious nature. For you see, there is a normal scream, in a normal person's scream, of a singular male. You don't go on to hear helplessness, dread, fear, curiosity, or even surprise. No, but in that unnatural moment of panic, again I say, I wasn't subjected to any visual horror until the very end. Once I feared the worst. Only a singular question reverberated in my mind. How did this happen? I believe most of the men from our division and of the villagers we'd recruited immediately perished under the falling debris, and if not, then the further excavation hazards must have secured their untimely demise. At some points I even heard metallic clanks, curious thuds on metallic pipes, steel plates falling, and then silence. The sound of settling debris and the complex haze of confusion, fear, stupidity, humor. Yes, even humor. I wouldn't want to lie, would I? Why would I? It will only be suitable if I tell everything as it was and without any touch of mystery or exaggeration. The whole of the front portion of the cave descended down upon us. I'm not sure of any survivors, but in the distance beneath gravel, dirt and debris, I can hear screams, but I can sense astonishment in their speech as well. Only this was enough to deter me from even going beyond that hindrance, beyond that wall of debris. Note that if I was built like the Lord himself, or even had some supernatural powers of my own, even then I would have floundered in front of those gigantic boulders covering my exit. And even then to climb the steep wall would have been a drudgerous task in itself. I knew not what nature of spell came upon me, for in the face of death, call it my callous behavior or haughty demeanor, but I was unnaturally calm, at peace even. What propelled me through that abyss furthermore into those hideous points away from our work area, into these dismal corridors of death, is anyone's guess. But to say I escaped unscathed, was unharmed, would be a lie. From fear or from delicate wounds oozing a dangerous amount of blood from my head, I'm not sure exactly what caused me to faint, for it was as sudden and quick as the collapse of our dig site. Sleep came as a deliverance, if only for a jiff, but in that merciful period of time floating betwixt maddening labyrinths of my transient days, I sought out many wonders. Under a moonless sky, and in the vast, unfathomable plains of sheer nothingness, I met a singular deity, of whom I can describe with just visions and no lore, and only that ensued respite from my unending fright, and nothing more. How would you deny the subconscious? Yes, the subconscious mind. How would you deny it? How would you deny the unceasing urge to explore what further these damp corridors held within them, even when some inexplicable sound, as of some ancient monstrosity, as in under unspeakable pain, was scarcely audible, the type of sound one wouldn't expect in a cave, shunned of for 1,001 years? I found it impossible to deny the perpetual urge to seek what these dank caverns held, what they hid. For death was imminent, and the only way to seek merciful oblivion. First, I must tell you of the paintings that I saw. I like to believe that it was only the half-luminescence of the flashlight and half-shadow of my own body which fell upon those paintings, and made them appear even more hideous. For you see, in my several years of being an archaeologist, only once before had I felt extreme terror. Only once, you see. Even then I was in the merciful company of my fellow observers. But what I saw there was a complex mixture, a disproportionate compound of everything that's unwelcome, unwholesome, and ghastly. What are these paintings but only a reflection of the culture, only a reflection of their dreams and their thoughts? From what I've gathered from the innumerable accounts I've read, of the numerous books I've galloped through in my years of erudition, only scarcely have I witnessed paintings depicting true fear, unadulterated terror. From what I saw, I could only derive this singular conclusion. Years ago, I'm quite unsure about it, for in a normal chain of events, uranium-thorium dating would have been conducted on these specimens, as well as these rocks, to find out the exact age. But this cave art, I believe, must go as far as 24,000 years old. In the very first of these prehistoric arts that I stumbled upon, it was all but a representation of a ritual altar inside similar-looking caves. Not much queer. Further up the cave wall, another one of these petroglyphs showed what must have been some kind of enormous mammal, but its entire anatomy. I'm not in a position to derive conclusions from these paintings. Queer was its entire structure, though, for although its enormous size, its wings, as in the art, was of even greater stature. Its shape was very uncanny, cloud-like, and it was levitating. An animal or a bird I can't quite fathom, but irrespective of its class, how was it to float with such gigantic body proportion? This was a deeply ponderous subject. Its lower body was all but a terrifying example of evolution, for instead of legs, there were numerous tentacles projected out of its lower body. Of its intelligence I had little clue of. What bothered me the most at first was what I believed to be a misrepresentation of the creature's eyes. There were hundreds of those maddening eyes, leering straight down at those helpless people. Hundreds of them, yes, hundreds of those eyes. Even thousands, I'm not quite sure, for I said the visibility was getting alarmingly low. Even then the painting wasn't carried out in much detail. Further, as I sauntered on the precarious ledge, now blissfully aware of certain things, more of those harrowing paintings came into view. In some, I swear I thought I even saw wanderers bearing striking similarities to us. No headlamps and modern gears with them, of course. Whilst in some the monstrosity was being worshipped, whilst in some of the arts the figures seemed to defend themselves, throwing pebbles, javelins, but what are these tidbits to a deranged monster like that? At length I found myself standing across another spectacular find, which fellow researchers and archaeologists like me would have been tempted to explore. So here I am, exempting the tempting details of the find, but now I know what forbade our own workers from working near those figurines. Vile, organic liquid covered the entire surface, and at once I found myself uttering curses of unfathomable origins. I'm not talking out of my wits here, for you must see I even remember our coordinates. I remember every detail of our trip. It's not that I'm going insane or I'm even mildly hallucinating, but believe me when I say that this liquid was some sort of excreta, saliva at best, not human, emanating such an odious smell I have little doubt over its origin. Only further ahead on the cave path, the ominous reality choked my neck, strangled my breaths, and only further ahead on the cave path is the reason I forbade anyone from re-digging on this land of nebulous horror. Further, as I walk through the squalid floor, once again I would like to remind you I'm not under any kind of stupor. Neither I was then nor am I now suffering from any drug-induced hallucination. There, without any delay, I would like to say what I found was the extremity of what is hideous, unpleasant, and unbelievable. Unbelievable at most, at best. At first I checked my nerves. Yes, I did. For sometimes high blood pressure or excessive anxiety, I believe, can induce hallucination as well. No abnormalities there. I feel no shame in dictating what I did next. The last straw which sent me running down to where I am now. In a dream I raced back through the same precarious ledges which I earlier crossed with such perseverance. Better to fall and perish than to suffer endlessly in a cloud of persistent dread. Only if God showed any kind of mercy, I would have perished there and then. The reasonable of you are free to reason with my statement and comment on my shameful course of a run. Say that I might be overthinking or running parallel with my anxiety. But to say my reaction was anything but involuntarily will of course not do it justice. I found myself standing over an abyssal pit, common in these kinds of caves, and the sound of that monstrosity, the baying, was the loudest there, and the smell was suffocating. What bothered me was the sheer stature of the pit, and the colossal width. Even that's justifiable under lack of proper measuring tools and other instruments. As I've said already numerous times, visibility was low, so it could have been some sort of wicked illusion. But even it is not that which at first confused me and then sent me racing like a mad hound. No. There, as I looked into the pit with my flashlight, tiny orb-like things reflected back the light. At first, I thought to flee for an altogether different reason. Bats. For I thought bats, for some peculiar reason, instead of the cave roofs, decided to settle on the pit, but only a singular oddity erased every merciful assumption my deranged mind had to offer. They all blinked simultaneously, in sheer unison, unanimously. They all blinked. There, as once again I fixated my gaze on the queer abyss, it lit up. Through hundreds of orbs. At first it seemed like orbs, then I applied the vestiges of sanity left in me, just like flashes of tube lights, flashlights even. It blinked again, thousands of flashes at once, like eyes. It blinked, yes, it blinked like eyes. Eyes. The paintings, the creature in those hideous paintings, the baying and the saliva all around me. This cave. Is it a cave? Or is it... Once again the cave erupted with what I can only comprehend as laughter. Plain laughter erupted in the whole of that confined space. An inhuman laughter of the most animalistic kind, mocking a very distinct human emotion. Happiness. At once the remnants of what was sanity propelled me through that horrendous course of path, through those same corridors of insanity. At once I ran like a mad hound, like some sort of carnivore running behind a fleeting group of prey. Baying is very faint now, and almost ceases here. Even the laughter, although for the noxious smell I can't utter the same. If only to perish remains my fate, then it's with a heavy heart and a foreboding fear that I derive this hideous conclusion. My return to that accursed pit is imminent. For I must find out whatever plagues these plains, this cave. For the time being, amidst moving shapes, deafening groaning of that nameless entity, and blinding darkness, I will continue to document peculiarities. For now, I must return. I decided to write this for a few reasons. One, to honor my fallen comrades. Well, to be perfectly honest, I didn't actually see them die. Either way, their bodies now belong to the cave people, albeit dead or alive. And two, because the world needs to know they exist. Of course, it says that we discovered, but I suppose it's only I who's found them, since it was just me who survived the onslaught. That is to say that no one else escaped. Well, that I know of. It had always been a childhood dream of mine to go further in than any man alive. Ever since I learned about it as a child, I had wanted to explore the entire cave. To put things into perspective, experts have estimated the cave to be over 1,000 miles long. So far, only 400 miles or so has been mapped out. Its nickname is the Limestone Labyrinth. An apt description, if you ask me. There's also 200 other caves that have disconnected or broken off from the main, the self-made structure. To say that Mammoth Cave is intimidating may just be the understatement of the century. My name is Joe, and I'm known as the endless thrill-seeker in my town. A local hero? You can hardly say that. Growing up in the backwoods of Kentucky, I've naturally become an experienced woodsman who spent many years in the great outdoors. Hunting, fishing, camping, rappelling, mountain climbing, free-falling and cave diving. I've gone spelunking while fearlessly exploring uncharted territories and everything in between. Even 4 years in the military. So, needless to say, I'm an adrenaline junkie. I suppose I should begin by explaining a few things. I need to be completely transparent and upfront with everyone. No, this isn't a monster, a demon, or even a ghost story. Something to note, that it isn't predators, which you can visually see most of the time, but what you can't, that scares me the most. Not only the darkness in these massive underground endless tunnels and caves, but also fear of the unknown. It's one thing to see a wolf or a bear. I can deal with that. Run for the truck and haul ass, but, well, how the hell do you escape something you've never even heard of? Who knows what the hell is even in there? Well, those are my thoughts as I weighed the risks before entering illegally. Oh, wait, I forgot to tell you. Wildlife experts say there are over 130 different species of animals within the cave. And those are just the ones we know of. The cave boasts some of the richest caverniculous creatures, including 14 species of troglobites, animals that need to live in a cave. Oh, and troglophiles, animals that can live in or outside a cave, known only to exist there. One of the park's most well-known and unusual species is the eyeless cavefish, which is adapted to the lightless environment by no longer growing eyes. The cave system of Mammoth Cave National Park began to form more than 280 million years ago. The earth rose and twisted and allowed water to erode the rock into the current cave system. Mammoth Cave was created by the natural process of limestone erosion, known as karst topography. During this process, rain and rivers slowly dissolve and shape soft limestone, creating a vast system of caves. Underground rivers are still carving new passages today. Beyond their scientific and recreational value, karst aquifers like Mammoth Cave provide drinking water for approximately 40% of the U.S. population. The surrounding forest contains one of the most diverse habitats in the nation, supporting more than 1,300 flowering species and bird species like bald eagles, wood warblers, and thrushes. You can see flowers along the hiking trails. In the 1800s, railroads were the best way to access the cave. The first railroad to the area opened in 1859, and by 1886, the line ran directly to the cave, bringing in tens of thousands of visitors every year. Two of the original locomotives, number 4 and number 2, are on display today in the Mammoth Cave terminus at the end of the line. You can use the historic Mammoth Cave Railroad bike and hike trail to access the locomotives via the old railroad corridor. Well, now that you know a little history about myself and the cave, I'll get right to it. This is simply my tale of the deepest, darkest depths of the largest cave system in the world. And what or who I've encountered. Admittedly, making the biggest mistake of my life. Venturing into the unexplored areas. There's a reason we aren't meant to dwell in caves. This is the stuff nightmares are made of. Our group consisted of myself and 3 military buddies, John, Mark, and Tom. John and Mark I've known since we were kids. Best friends for years, did everything together. Just a few crazy guys from the backwoods of Kentucky. Nothing too special about us, so to speak. However, Tom, he's the real badass of the group. Older fellow in his 40s. A tough-of-nails kind of guy. Very quiet. One of those really tough-looking, cigarette-smoking, gun-toting lunatics that you just wouldn't want to mess with. He'd never told us the kind of things he'd experienced overseas, and we never asked. Tom would be our guide, being the most experienced in Mammoth Cave of the group. The 4 of us spent weeks preparing for this expedition, saved up money, took off from work, gathered all the supplies and gear necessary, packed clothes, though packing lightly. Many portions of the cave are so small you have to crawl around or simply suck in your fat gut to fit through the narrow paths. The walls close in so tight you can barely breathe in some places. For the most part, most all caves tend to stay at a reasonable 52 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 11 degrees Celsius for all you foreigners. So we wear long-sleeve shirts and cargo pants, naturally. Everyone checked to make sure they had extra flashlights, knives, backup batteries, climbing equipment, ropes, and more. Hell, I even packed some waterproof matches, just in case. Tom, being the over-prepared guy he is, never leaves home without his beloved .45 caliber M1911, used by the U.S. military for decades. A very tough and durable weapon, to be sure. After feeling as though we were all ready to make the trip, the truck was loaded up with all our gear and 4 adventurous, crazy bastards looking for the next thrill. Fortunately, it's a 4-door truck with a 6-foot bed and plenty of space. Son, do you even know where the hell you're going? Tom says with a cigarette in his mouth, ashes falling onto his bare skin. Doesn't even flinch. Nope, not exactly, Tom. Just then the driver's side door flings open as I am forcefully tossed from my seat. Hey, it's my truck, you asshole, I yell with confidence, thrusting my chest forward and chin up high. Yep, and I'm driving. Got a problem? Then move me, Tom says as he flicks a cigarette in my face. John and Mark both look at me with a kind of, hey, what do you want us to do expression, but only stand and watch. With a deep sigh, I exhale. I accept defeat as I whimper and open the door to the back seats, murmuring to myself while doing so. Sitting behind Tom looking at the rope in my lap, just thinking, hey, what if I just wrap this around? Damn. Sorry, off to a bad start here. Really need to get out of my own head sometimes. Right, so, back to our adventure. Tom starts my truck. The engine roars loudly and the exhaust is fired up. Yep, it's one of those 80s trucks with no catalytic converter. A 3-inch straight pipe all the way from the headers at the engine to the muffler, which doesn't really muffle all that much. It's just loud, okay? Take my word for it. Well, Tom hits the gas pedal, revving the engine and shifting into drive. Forward the truck moves, shaking violently as the terrain is rough in the mountains. Mark speaks up. Yo, Tom, ease it up a bit, would you? Tom doesn't say a word. Adjusting the rearview mirror, glaring directly at Mark sitting next to me. If I didn't know any better, I'd say he was looking into his soul. The rest of us appear puzzled, looking at one another, thinking, Tom seems a bit off today, though we say nothing. Damn it, I lost my dog in the woods today. Took him for a hike. Spent all morning looking for the bastard. Thor never came home, Tom said while staring at the rocky roads ahead. The silence in the truck remains, only hearing the truck's engine continuing to rumble as the gravel road is shooting small rocks from the tires and sounds of nature from the wilderness around us. Moments pass. Mark taps Tom on the shoulder. Hey, sorry, man. Maybe he'll come home by the time we get back, Mark says with assurance. Everyone else speaks in unison. Yeah, saying cheerfully. Tom doesn't say a word and looks out the window at a deer scurrying off into the woods. The trip to get there is a few more hours of banter, laughing and joking, eating beef jerky and smashing a few cold ones along the way. Maybe not the brightest idea, but if you have time to think, you have time to drink. Am I right? We're almost there. Hope you boys brought your Cub Scout badges. You're about to see some serious shit, Tom says as he throws his final cigarette from the truck. Each of us looking at one another, smiling like, oh yeah, sure, mockingly. Departing the truck and grabbing our gear, we park far in the woods. You see, you can take tours of small lengths of the cave itself to get a glimpse of what it's like. However, we are venturing into a more unknown entrance. It's still midday and the sun is out. Tom leads the way. We begin hiking to our final destination. All along the unmarked trail, I tie little red banners with reflectors on small trees to hopefully be able to use these to find our way back to the truck for the journey home. Tom looks down, holding a paper hand-drawn map. He stops and points. That way, saying as he commands us. I veer in John's direction with an unsure expression on my face, signaling, is he sure? Along the hike, we're met by several creatures of the forest, including squirrels, birds, deer, and even a black bear. Undeterred, we push forward and reach a large opening in the ground. It's so dark, you can't see anything but the walls for a few feet, using only the sunlight that's slowly darkening. This is it, boys. Tie a rope around that tree. We go in here, Tom says while pointing down into the depths of hell. Each man gears up and slowly rappels down the rope hanging over 100 feet deep. 4 LED headlamps are on, brightly looking in every direction, almost like how you see spotlights in the sky. On the way down, the massive and seemingly dark hole, I can feel it getting colder. The walls are wet and slick. Our footwear are weatherproof, tactical Magnum boots with slip resistance and extra ankle support for climbing. Finally, my feet touch solid ground as I unhook myself from the rope. Reaching for the 3-cell police-style maglite attached to my belt, I shine it upwards. I can see the top of the hole with this particular flashlight, The distance range for the maglite is roughly 450 yards. It's about 411 meters. John beckons for me to follow, as Tom has already begun his trek forward into the cave. This path is open widely for as far forward as we can see. Looking upwards, you'll see stalactite formations hanging from the ceiling. Some rooms are as large as an auditorium. Our headlamps are currently what give us illumination. Placing my 3-cell maglite back into its holster, we move forward. Walking carelessly for roughly 2 to 3 miles, we reach a portion of the cave which changes drastically. Tom, John and Mark rested briefly before dropping to their bellies to crawl hundreds of yards through a narrow passage, their packs and helmets scraping under a rock ceiling barely 2 feet high. The colored walls range from beige to dark brown. After many hours in the 51-degree subterranean darkness, our clothes are dirt-caked and we're still working toward a remote section where the known map stops. The next part of the path we're on leads to an area where patience is paramount. Tom leads the way, gripping a rocky ledge deep underground. He lowered himself gently down a 12-foot drop-off, his headlamp flashing past rock walls dotted with sparkling gypsum in a remote section, off-limits to tourists and recreational cavers. There were 8-inch ledges we had to walk slowly across, using only our gloves to grip onto certain dips in the cave walls. Eventually reaching a somewhat normal path again, where we could walk upright, we're led deeper and deeper into the dark depths. Or so I thought. Mark says he sees light coming from up ahead. Our group moves towards it cautiously. There's another entrance Tom has led us to that was partly developed for tours before it was abandoned during World War II. Steep steps descended through rock and into a trail filled with cave crickets, which eventually gave way to areas of rockfall, caverns and drop-offs. Crunching in the silence, our trek took us past broken oil lamps, abandoned shoes and rusted sardine tins from the 1930s and 40s. Footprints made decades ago were still frozen in the dust, as if on the moon. In one spot, ancient shark teeth were embedded in the wall. You could even say we found a place that's frozen in time. By late evening, our group had hiked, climbed and crawled through rock piles, small passages, soaring domes and drop-offs in a section called New Discovery, dubbed that in the 1930s. We passed pools with translucent crayfish and walls plastered with gypsum blooms that looked like flowers. Several times we spotted passages that hadn't been explored, making notes for future trips. During breaks, we sat in the dust and rocks, eating candy bars and canned sausages and trading stories about cave trips and war stories from our time in the military. At this point, we're quite deep within the cave. John pulls me aside to tell me that an hour ago, he swore he saw a creature standing over 8 feet tall with 4 arms, stray long hairs hanging from the back of its head. He was terrified and, well, I believed him. I've no idea how we didn't notice the change in him. Well, of course, he is always so quiet. It can be hard to notice, I suppose. So I urged Tom over to have John tell him everything he's seen. There's a very loud, low-pitched growl, which we hear very audibly. The roars grow louder with each passing moment. Tom instructs us to shut off our headlamps. A slight miscalculation on our part. A few of us thought the darkness would aid us in this situation. Our mistake was thinking the dark was our friend. What we didn't realize is that we merely adopted the darkness. These creatures, or cave people, were born in it. I can feel the ground of the cave vibrate violently as we're quickly surrounded by yelling and screaming from an unknown language. Tom lets out a deathly scream. I can hear him fighting for his life. John turns on his headlamp. I grab my 3-cell maglite, shining it in the direction of the struggle. There, before us, stands a massive being with 4 arms, with a strange-shaped head, almost cone-shaped. And I see Tom damn near being squeezed to death. He reaches for his gun and fires twice into the torso of the being, strangling him. It drops Tom and retreats. Now, all of our lights are on, and we make a run for it, moving as quickly as possible. Myself, John and Mark run as if we're being hunted. At this point, I think it's fair to say that we are. Winded and sore, Mark stops to regain his composure, takes a breath. "Where's Tom at? Wasn't he right behind us?" Mark asks, unsure of what had happened. Looking around, we see no sign of him, as the 3 of us discuss the risk-reward factor of going back for him. "Well, they're sure as hell hostile, and the only gun in this cave is half a mile back that way," John says. "Yeah, but he was our only guide, and a dear friend. I say we go back for him. Plus, we have no idea where we are, or which way's out," I say, unconvincingly. After a few more moments of arguing and pleading our cases, we're soon interrupted by that same terrifying loud growl. "Shit. Come on, let's go," Mark yells. Though we're moving at rapid speeds, I can hear more footsteps closing in all around us. Mark is in front of me, and John behind in the last position. I see Mark hit a wall, only it wasn't a cave wall. Rather, another cave person creature. He fell to the ground. The creature leans down and grabs him, lifting him only using 2 of its arms. The other 2 arms strike down on Mark's face. I see his head fall forward into the creature's chest. It looks down at me and smiles. John and I turn and flee immediately in the opposite direction. We tremble in fear at the sight of these beast-like people. The ground of the cave is uneven, and the terrain is quite rough. John falls face first, hitting his chest on the solid floor. I stop to help him up as he struggles to free his foot from a hole. The same cries are heard in the area we ran from before. John is still stuck, and his boot is lodged tightly. He yells for me to run and leave him. After moments of attempting to cut his boot off, I see the same creature from before approaching. I blind it with my maglite as it screeches loudly, swiping at nothing. It falls to the ground and hurls a large rock at me, soon finding John on the ground. He also attempts to blind the towering creature kneeling above him. He grabs John lying on the ground nearby and starts to gnaw on him, biting his leg clean off. This damn thing is so strong. I knew immediately I stood no chance in a fight against it. Once more John yells in agony and demands I run like hell, tossing me the hand-drawn map which Tom had held earlier. I take off running again at full speed, in horror, as I hear my best friend being torn limb from limb, helplessly. His screams will be with me forever. I ran for what felt like hours. I went up and down the cavern. Eventually, I slept in a very low-ceilinged room that I was certain they could not reach me in. Their bodies were far too large. The cave grew quiet. I heard only crickets and my heavy breathing as I slowly crept into a restless sleep. My head lay on my back. After some time, I felt water dripping onto my face. I woke up to a dim light on my flashlight. Tapping on it, trying to bring back illumination, it dies completely. Apparently I'd left my maglite on by mistake. There's also a cave salamander on my chest, which is multicolored. While running, I'd lost most of my supplies. I still have rope, matches, food and water. My headlamp still works, for now. My extra batteries must have fallen out during my retreat. I'm still wearing a compass on my wristwatch, which evidently is not as waterproof as it's advertised. Oh, wait, never mind. The watch is actually now broken and cracked, but the compass appears to still be functional. All I have for now as a guide is this crudely drawn map and compass, while deep, deep underground. I'm now afraid of every single noise I hear. Paranoia kicks in at an all-time high. Continuing to backtrack as best as possible, I notice bats are moving rapidly in one specific area. I do my best to follow them, as some areas are very narrow and low to the ground. I could still hear bats screeching in the distance. However, I can no longer see them. Hoping like hell they're heading towards an exit. Any exit. Chasing the faint sounds of wings flapping, I fall on top of these old, steep steps. To my amazement, I've made it back to an entrance that was shown earlier by Tom. At this point, I've been running for days, fallen down many times, and completely lost, bruised and bloody. My clothes are soaking wet, but, well, I'm alive. With all the strength I have left, I pull myself up and cautiously make my way up the unkempt stairs. The sound of roaring in the distance quickens my pace significantly. No matter what that is, I do not want to come face to face with those things again. It's safe to say, my days of cave exploration are well and truly over. I'm out of the deep, dark abyss. Now in the forest, once again lost, but on familiar territory, land. I can see a stream of water nearby. Thinking to myself that, well, I'm all out of water, I grab my canteen, I lean over and take a drink of the clear, blue spring water that I hope is clean and not contaminated by giardiacysts and cryptosporidium oocysts, which can cause diarrhea or much worse. Then I begin dunking my canteen under the water, filling it up, sitting for a break and taking a breather. I observe the area around me and begin to notice the stream is flowing rapidly. I quickly remembered from my time in the wilderness to follow water leading downstream. Eventually it will lead to a river or even civilization. After gulping down as much water as my body can hold, I begin following the waterway. Traveling for hours, I reach a clearing and what looks to be some type of structure. I try to yell out for help, but my vocal cords are damaged. I can barely even speak. In this moment, I'm grateful for that fact, because I've now reached an entire colony of these cave people. Dozens of them are moving about, some gathering wood. They're speaking to each other with their hand movements mostly, and some grunting. I saw one completely rip a small tree from its roots in the ground and walk away with it under one arm. My mouth drops, and I gasp quietly upon seeing so many of them. Just then, an idea occurs to me. Maybe they aren't violent people as I previously thought, although I am pretty sure they killed my friends. But we were intruding in their home. I mean, if someone broke into my house, I'd shoot them, no question about it. That being said, I'm not risking certain death by confronting these giants. From a good distance, I continued to watch them for days, studying them. In my pack I have a paper and pen. I wrote down notes, as much as I could. Here are some of the things that I transcribed. Day 1. I saw a smaller giant-like cave person join the group. It looked oddly different than the others, and spoke more audibly than the rest. The smaller ones collect berries and hunt smaller animals, vermin and such. Day 2. The giants seem to have some intelligence about them, as they're using tools and building structures out in the forest. I saw Tom dragged from the cave opening, and the creatures shrieking and yelling when they saw him. I covered my mouth as I saw Tom barely breathing. One of them carried him back inside as the others were flailing their arms violently at Tom. I never saw him again after that. Day 3. The smaller giant cave people sleep outside the caves, while the larger ones live deep within. They hunt only at night and, well, work during the day, so to speak. Their skin is light brown toned. That's the best I can describe it. Day 4. Well, it seems as though they can't hear very well, which is why they don't talk or grunt a whole lot. So that explains the body language and rapid hand movements. I just saw a smaller cave person point in my direction. Day 5. I left the area. I couldn't risk being caught again. My location had been compromised. I have nothing left to eat. Retreating is the only option left at this point. I can only imagine what would happen if I were captured as well. Day 6. Take a very long way around the colony of giants. Along the way I caught and ate a wild animal. Not my proudest moment. But screw you. I may die if I don't get some nutrition in me soon. I don't know what day it is anymore. If the cave goes on for 1,000 miles, there's no way of telling how long these woods go on for. My compass has failed now. I've tried following the northern star, checking the trees for moss. I thought the cave system was bad. Now I know. It's an ironic habit of human beings to run faster when we've lost our way. And here I am, deep in the forest with barely anything. This may seem counterproductive, but I move only at night, as the days are too hot. Many nights come and go, and I think I can see a mountain in the distance. If I can reach the top, maybe I can see a landmark to head towards, with some luck. Maybe even a hope. I rest every chance I get, as my body is weak, taking every opportunity to fill up my canteen once more, still afraid of every noise I hear. Leaves rustling and branches breaking at any time at night. My own over-exaggerated movements sometimes startle me. I begin to slowly venture towards the mountain in the distance, traveling for a few more days now. I collapse to the ground and pass out from pure exhaustion. No idea how long I'm out for, but I'm awakened again and completely disoriented while being entirely doused in water. Frantically sitting up, I see 2 men with rifles standing around. One is looking down at me. "Hey, this son of a bitch ain't dead," one man says. The other man turns to face me. "I'll be damned." The larger man bellows out, with an accent even I can barely understand. "Where am I?" I ask weakly. The first man laughs and says, "You're a long way from home, son. Here, let's get you up." The 2 men carry me to an all-terrain vehicle and lay me down next to a dead deer in the back of the 4-wheeler, which I assume they recently just caught and plan to eat. Hope I'm not next. The trails are bumpy, but somehow I fall asleep on top of the deer. When I come to, I see a barn, a farmhouse, and 2 double-wide trailers, with tons of farm animals frolicking about in the pasture. Eventually, the men guide me to a shack where a young woman nurses me back to health and takes me to the local sheriff's department, where I get in touch with family, and a deputy takes me to the local bus station. I relax and look back on the last few weeks as I make my way back home. I'm forever grateful to that random redneck family who saved my life. Wish I had a chance to thank you. But, quite frankly, I still don't know where I was, or who you are. Well, if you ever travel to Kentucky and want to tour our caves, please be careful. There's still so much more that we may never know about them. And so once again, we reach the end of tonight's podcast. My thanks as always to the authors of those wonderful stories, and to you for taking the time to listen. Now, I'd ask one small favor of you. Wherever you get your podcast from, please write a few nice words and leave a 5-star review, as it really helps the podcast. That's it for this week, but I'll be back again same time, same place, and I do so hope you'll join me once more. Until next time, sweet dreams and bye-bye.